First off, real quickly, before we get into the big Switch 2 news here, because this is some pretty big stuff, I want to let you know we are giving away a Nintendo Switch 2 through the link down in the description or the pinned comment. Pretty great what we're doing there. Viral sweep. Anyone can enter as long as it's legal in your given country. And yeah, I wish all you guys luck. We'll be drawing a winner, random drawed winner, closer to when Switch 2 actually comes out. All right, let's go ahead and get into today's news because we have some interesting things going on here with the actual screen of the Nintendo Switch 2. It is one of the biggest mysteries we've had. We've even had some clock speed leaks and stuff like that for the GPU and CPU, which may or may not be accurate. It's not as if we can verify this stuff right now. But we've had, obviously, the RAM has been out there, the 256 gigabytes of internal storage, and spec-wise, we've just had a lot of different things kind of percolating and happening around that, some of that coming from shipping data, some of it just being rumors. And today, we have what I have to call a rumor for now, but one that has interesting stuff going on with it about the actual screen for Switch 2. And while yes, I'll let you know right now, it is not an OLED screen, it is LCD. There's some great news, assuming that all of this is correct and coming from someone here who seems to be so far in 2025 fairly reliable over on FamiBoards. So this is a pretty exciting thing we're going to dive into. I want to thank you guys for being here. Let's go ahead and get into the news. We're going to go over to the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit because they gathered all the posts together and they linked to all of them. So if you want to go verify all the stuff, you can. That it's on FamiBoards. So it says this is from FamiBoards, and the user Secret Boy, who previously almost accurately called out the GPU performance before the clock speeds were leaked 10 days later, back in January. 3 teraflops docked, 1.4, 1.5 T-flops handheld, which turned out to be pretty close to the actual leaked clocks of 3.1 and roughly 1.72. The 120 hertz claim was originally first made back in January, twice, and it was also the account's first message in the forum. So post 2. I've heard the screen supports 120 hertz and variable refresh rate, which should help a lot in handheld. Then it said people should be prepared for 3 teraflops stocked and around half that in handheld. I don't expect people to believe me, but that's what I've heard the final specs are. I've also heard that the screen is 120 hertz LCD that supports variable refresh rate, which is amazing because developers can optimize the handheld profiles of their games with variable refresh rate and 40 FPS in mind, as an example. He has since then reiterated and confirmed with evidence that Switch 2 will indeed have a screen refresh rate of 120 hertz, supports both HDR and variable refresh rate, and has an LCD display. So post number 4, thanks, LMAO. I was hoping to share more info, but kind of forgot about it, and then most of it leaked anyways. Although I will reiterate, the screen is 120 hertz with HDR and variable refresh rate support. That's why I'm personally most excited for. He says, oh yeah, I forgot to mention, it is an LCD. No idea about the actual quality of the screen, but I think OLED was always going to be too expensive for this feature set, which they needed to get into the first iteration of the hardware so developers could optimize their games around it. And that is his speculation. This is a huge revelation for the next generation console if true, as it has the potential to show better color, higher frame rates, smoother gameplay, and for it to not look so obvious when a game fails to hit its target frame rate. The Switch OLED and Steam Deck only support 60 hertz, but this effectively doubles that. It's also notable, it doesn't say it here, that the Steam Deck OLED version, the one that comes with the OLED screen, supports up to 90 hertz, but this is still higher than that. Now, one thing that's really cool about this, if this is true, is variable refresh rate is the thing that helps smooth out the game when the frame rates are all over the place. Switch does not support variable refresh rate on its screen. So without variable refresh rate, the frame rate dips become extremely noticeable, or if you're running at an odd frame rate, like 45 frames instead of 30 or 60, it just doesn't work very well on the screen. This really smooths that out. HDR is something to talk about just briefly because there is a possibility that this is kind of a fake HDR. Like the best versions of HDR for an LCD come from the ones that are kind of like mini LED where you have individual dimming zones. And I sincerely doubt Nintendo went with an LCD at this size that has individual dimming zones. There's not even a lot of them that do it because usually at this size, you would go with an OLED panel. I'm not saying the tech doesn't exist and they couldn't have used a mini LED. They absolutely could have. I just don't feel like they did. It's probably still an edge-lit display, which yes, they can do HDR with. It's just not as good. But one thing about it just being there as a standard means HDR in dot mode will also be standard. So we should see a lot of HDR support for games on Nintendo Switch 2. And that's really exciting. Obviously, variable refresh rate, that's huge in general. Now, about the 120 hertz. I want to talk about this because we actually heard about this a long time ago, about a year ago, May of last year, from a Taiwanese economic forum. So you go back to the Gaming Leaks and Rumors subreddit here, you see Taiwanese Economic Forum reports that Nintendo Switch 2 will have a 120 hertz screen, improved battery life, but only 8 gigabytes of RAM and 64 gigabytes of storage. Now, this was a year ago. Maybe the specs weren't finalized. I don't know. But we now know because of shipping data, there's actually 12 gigabytes of RAM and 256 gigabytes of storage. So we know that 2 of these bits of information are incorrect. They also talked about the price. Like it would be a 33% increase to 400. Again, we don't obviously know if that is true yet. But this is what's interesting is that here is the 120 hertz, first mentioned a year ago by this Taiwanese economic website. So it's notable that this just kind of backs up that in a sense that there's been multiple reports out there about 120 hertz. And look, I don't have the exact clip for you, but Thunderstash Gaming from the Nintendo by podcast has been in contact, and also from his own YouTube channel, obviously, with BenQ. In fact, I'll drop the review he did of this BenQ, essentially a dock, a mobile dock that you can plug in and just accessorize things and get HDMI outs, is supposedly supporting Nintendo Switch 2 because Nintendo Switch 2 supports HDMI 2.1, and that's 120 hertz with variable refresh rate and HDR. All of that is supported with that little mobile dock, which I find really interesting. That dock is for more than just Switch 2, so it might have nothing to do with Switch 2, but it supports all these features that Switch 2 would actually need. So that could just be more evidence to the pile. If you guys are interested, again, there's a review of that dock down below from Thunderstash Gaming. So look, guys, I am going to sit here and say all of this is awesome, but what really matters is if this stuff is real. I really want this to be 100% real. This looks so cool. And look, things are real in the sense that these posts exist. You can click on post 4 here, see it load up. You know, here's where it says, although I'll reiterate, the screen's 120 hertz, HDR, variable refresh rate. As you see, this stuff is obviously right. It's there, or at least right in that it exists. I want there to be 120 hertz for several reasons, and I don't think a lot of games would support more than 60 hertz. Variable refresh rate's a big deal because you can support 40 FPS, 45, 50 FPS, and get a rather smooth experience. Or if frame rates dip from 60 to 40, it won't be as noticeable because variable refresh rate helps smooth out that experience. However, while that's a huge deal, 120 hertz, I think, can get supported in some games. Again, not going to be supported in a vast majority of the big AAA games because they're using so much of the power. Trying to push 120 FPS is nearly impossible. But there's a lot of indie titles or even smaller Nintendo published titles that absolutely could take advantage of 120 hertz. You could think of some Twitch platformers that are much more simplistic in their art directions and their stylings could really benefit from 120 hertz. And again, that is just something that is straight up better than Steam Deck. And now, well, Steam Deck does have an OLED version, and there'll likely be an OLED version of Switch 2 down the road. Right now, out the gate, this would be a better screen than the base screen for the Steam Deck, because not only is it a bigger screen with a higher resolution, remember the reported resolution, which again isn't confirmed yet, is 1080p. That is higher than the 800p of the Steam Deck. You get the 120 hertz, which is twice as much, obviously with the HDR and variable refresh rate. That is just high dynamic range, by the way, for those who wanted to know what HDR is. I keep saying variable refresh rate, VRR, but I keep saying HDR when it's high dynamic range, just so you guys understand what the terms mean. You can go look it up. I am not by any means a screen expert over here. I just know that these things are generally considered things that people want. It makes your games look better, makes the colors more accurate, the blacks deeper, the gameplay smoother. This is all things that are just benefits to us as consumers. So if Nintendo went with this tech, that's absolutely awesome. If they didn't, well, I guess we'll wait and see. The funny thing is we're not going to probably know on April 2nd, and I'm just going to put this out there. Anyone that's like, I don't want to hear about tech specs or any of this stuff, let's just wait for April 2nd. Nintendo doesn't talk specs. If you think they're going to give you exact details of the screen, you might see the word 1080p. You're not going to see the frame rate, or you're not going to see them talk about HDR or variable refresh rate. You're not going to see them mention 120 hertz. You're not going to see them mention 12 gigabytes of RAM. You might see them mention 256 gigabytes of storage, they do sometimes talk about that, but you're not going to see them mention the RAM or even like what the CPU and GPU. It'll just be like a custom NVIDIA, GPU or whatever. They're not going to give you exact details because Nintendo doesn't go into tech specs. That's just the way they are. They want to sell their system based on the games and the features of the platform. That's what they want to sell you on. And to be honest, that's what most consumers care about. But if you want to know exact specs, NVIDIA potentially may release a press release given some details. But in general, we find out about the stuff from the dev portal or from when die shots are taken and x-rays are done and all this exact stuff is figured out and people hack the system and all that kind of stuff. So it might be a bit, even after Nintendo Switch 2 comes up, that we actually know the true 100% specs of Switch 2. But hey, we'll be able to verify the screen stuff pretty easy. That's going to be an easy one. We should be able to verify 120 hertz variable refresh rate in HDR literally day one. The moment we even get our hands on this thing, it's possible even at the hands-on experiences, we might be able to verify this stuff. So anyways, folks, I want to thank you so much for tuning in. I am Nathaniel Robojans from Nintendo Prime, and I hope you are having a damn good day. You know it's a good day for us over here when we get 2 videos out. Catch you guys in the next one.